Welcome to the Leadership of Fools. We are about to up anchor and set sail into the heady ocean of business dilemmas and discussions. Nothing's going to stop us.
Today we tackle a dilemma. Can we teach people and organisations to be innovative? The conversation allows us to face into the role that fear plays in hindering things like innovation, to connect innovation with the normal human process of learning. Even the phrase getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Putting boundaries around failure. Innovation comes from the quiet, reflective moments, not necessarily weird and wacky. And what would you do if today was your last day in your current job? Today's executives are Simone, Carroll and Alice Sidhu. Both Simone and Alice are very experienced in the whole area of digital transformation and particularly customer centricity.
I'm very excited to be here today, navigating the 7 C's of excitement. That is the conversation we will be having.
7 C's of excitement.
7 C's of excitement.
Wow.
I hope my sibilance didn't destroy that. Joining, as always, us on board is shipmate deck scrubber.
Deck scrubber.
It's a necessity on a ship. Is Colin Beattie. Hello, Colin. How are you today?
It's so delightful to be with you, Amanda, today. It's fantastic.
I have a question for you to start us off, to kick us off, to launch today's conversation. Colin, what piece of old school technology or just old school hardware can you not live without or miss if it no longer exists?
I actually picture in my head the movie version of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And
of course you do.
And
who didn't go there first?
That's right. And for some reason, and the main character, and I don't even know his name, goes downstairs into the basement and finds an old school phone with the dial.
Yep.
And the funniest moment is he starts to press the numbers. And I went, oh, I remember that. I missed that. And my kids were just going, what is that? So I miss the phone that you just...
There was something
I know it's
special
audio,
about,
but I'm dialing.
Yeah, and there was something special about, like, if you got the number wrong and you had to start
and
again.
number nine went longer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's tangible. When conversations meant something.
I don't know why. Sorry, that's my answer.
I'm quite confident that that's the only time that answer will come up in this conversation, but it's a good one. I love it. Joining us as well, hoisting sails today, Simone Carroll. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Amanda. So happy to be here to share this time.
And for yourself, what piece of hardware or old school technology do you miss or cannot live without?
Well, I'm torn because I love the fashion of that calculator watch. I was a bit of a tomboy. And I love the convenience.
You can still get them.
Yeah. Is it a Casio? Casio watch?
I think it might have been Casio. Anyway, it was Casio. And, I thought that was a wonderful fashion statement and went really well with my pump Reeboks.
Oh, of course it did. High tops. Protect those ankles.
That's it. And I really miss those.
That's great.
I think I've seen someone we know named Rick Brown with a pair of those pump Reeboks just recently.
Well, that was real technology.
Real technology. I'm going to also say hoisting sails because we've got a lot of sails to hoist. We are joined as well by Alice Sydow.
Hi, Amanda.
How are you?
I'm delighted to be here, like everyone else.
Now, there's no right or wrong. Which piece of technology could you not live without or miss?
So I'm going to do what politicians do and answer the question that I actually want to answer.
Yeah, great.
Because I'm not sure I miss the technology, but one of the things that I was thinking about when Colin talked about the movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which I've not seen but will want to now, is the cassette player.
That's my answer too.
And so, and it's actually, I don't miss it, but there was this poignant moment of nostalgia when I saw Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes.
And the mixtape. And I see some nods, so you guys know what I'm talking about.
Completely.
And the whole mixtape and how that theme ran through that movie, I thought was particularly, for anyone who kind of grew up with that whole thing of recording.
Completely.
Yeah, play record.
Play record. And it's
I still have a
school.
cassette deck in my car.
Yeah.
We have not upgraded it in my vehicle, and all the tapes are now starting to get so stretchy that it doesn't work anymore. I'm
Yeah.
devastated.
So I appreciate that technology has moved on and enabled us in a completely different way.
Yes.
But I also, love the memories and the association of that.
Yeah.
I just don't want to go back there, that's all.
Love it.
When I
William?
was 14, can't help this now, but when I was 14, there was a good friend of mine, his name was Matt, and they used to call Matt Molly, as in Matt Molly Meldrum.
Right.
Okay? And I was always a bit devastated because they were prepared, this is my friends, called me Donny Sutherland. Now, those of you who are of a particular age may recall that Donny Sutherland was always the try-hard Molly Meldrum, and I was the try-hard in terms of the mixtape kings of Swan Hill High School. So,
Oh, Colin, you give so
I tell
much
you-
of yourself to
I
this
do, thank
podcast.
you.
You're very vulnerable right now. We will have to call you Donny. I feel bad, but now
I'm not
I
feeling
know
vulnerable.
this.
I was feeling proud. Now I'm starting to question myself.
Sorry, I've turned it around the wrong way.
That's
Let's
right.
go. Let's steer the ship back into its positive
Thank
light.
you.
I was going to say vulnerability would actually be asking what was on the mixtape.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's not go there.
Careless Whisper, George Michael.
Sexy saxophone. Is it too early to talk about a sexy saxophone?
Probably.
Never. Oh, I was going to say
sorry.
never. We're in international
I was going to
waters.
say never.
My embouchure was not correct for the saxophone. I had to play clarinet. Can't do the same solo on that.
You're
Anyway,
being vulnerable too.
I'm always vulnerable, Colin. That's my special skill, vulnerability. Moving into the more serious yet
luck.
still lighthearted conversation that we're going to talk about today. The question I'm posing, the question we will be talking about, is it possible to teach organisations or change cultures to be more innovative? Or innovative, depending on how you prefer to pronounce that word.
Oh, it's big. It's so I am a consultant. I have a range of different clients, different industries, and innovation and all its variations, including words like invention, is a cultural desire, and I think it's one of those topics that can frustrate people, can pay off, and anywhere in between. So I think it's a great topic because the question is, can you teach, as opposed to things like, do you have to confront the question of recruiting in new innovative talent? Can you build that sort of culture from within? I see you nodding, Alice. Where do we start on this one?
I don't know where we start, but it's certainly going to be an interesting conversation in terms of where we end, I think, with, I see Simone nodding too. Can you teach them? Yes. Is it easy?
Yes, with a hesitation.
Yeah, yes, because it's everything's doable, right? So everything's possible.
Yeah.
What's the formula? And I think this is what we're going to explore in the conversation, which is what's the formula or the recipe for success and stickiness and sustainability? Because what you're talking about is essentially cultural transformation. And essentially, creating an environment, and then the processes. First comes the cultural piece, and then the processes and the governance and the ways of working to actually make sure that that's embedded as a way of working, so that you become an organisation that has that in its DNA, which is where you want to get to.
Can I slow you down a bit on that? So you
Yeah.
say, let's start with the culture first. What do you mean by that?
So I think there's some ingredients around being innovative that you absolutely need to have, and that one of those things is you need to understand that it's important. You need to understand why it's important and how it's actually going to create value for your organisation. And that could be, because it's a business conversation, we can be pretty, open and say how it's going to add to the bottom line, and give you growth.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is how you need to have a risk appetite. Because innovation is actually, by its nature and definition, is about doing something that has not been done before.
Exactly.
It's not transformation, which is incremental. Innovation is about, turning something on its head. It's a light bulb. It's literally a light bulb moment. And so to do that, you need to go into, dare I make a nautical analogy, I'm hating myself right now, but I can't stop it.
Do it.
Uncharted waters, stormy seas, and there's a risk of capsizing.
That's right, but if you've got your safety checks and you're wearing your life jackets, it's doable.
Yeah. And so the culture around the organisation needs to have the risk appetite within constraints in terms of what you can do, and then you need to be able to accept that things are not necessarily going to stay on course. Someone stop me. These analogies.
No, you're on a roll.
These analogies are terrible. You won't stay on course, and how you course correct. And then, and what happens from that. And some things you've just got to write off. And so the other part of it is you've got to be prepared to say, we tried, it didn't work, cut, as opposed to what, we see a lot of organisations doing, which is 3 years still trying to resuscitate.
Right.
And so that's the cultural element around that. And so the safety and security that comes for people and leaders in terms of saying that that's okay, we accept that this is going to happen, and the parameters for that to be acceptable. And so you can operate without fear in that environment as well. So there's a lot of stuff in there. Sorry, I'm gonna stop.
No. Sorry,
Yeah.
there is a lot of stuff in there, but again, it's actually so beautifully articulated. Like, I almost feel like I want to listen to that podcast piece again and just write it all down. Because
If only we were recording it.
That's right. Funny about that. So I suspect there's lots of answers in there, but the question will be how? How do we do that, Simone?
Yeah, it is uncharted territory for many organisations. I think can you train an organisation to be innovative? Well, yes, you can, and it will innovate somehow. It's easy to sort of think about, the top, global companies when we think about this, but 98% of businesses, the butcher, the hairdresser, and the high street, and you'll see innovation there. You'll see winners and losers there. And if I take, my father was a hairdresser. If I take hairdressing, what's happened there? There's innovation in product. There's innovation in cutting. So the innovation's coming through. In most crafts, in most trades, there are new ways of doing things. The question, I think, though, for any investor of a business is, to what extent are you prepared to invest in innovation? And to what extent are you already invested in your core business? Is the core business by nature innovative? Are you a pure play digital company? Or is it something that's got a lot of debt in it? Energy, for example. You invested 35 years in a coal mine. So I think, to what extent investors are prepared to get behind the innovation, the research required, the time required to look into innovation is the big question. And perhaps an organisation doesn't need to learn to be overly innovative. Perhaps it needs to work with innovative companies and partner in order to get them to where that happy place, that place they need to go.
So in that, I hear that there's different ways of going about this.
Yeah, there's different ways.
We can quarantine. We can say, let's experiment over here and quarantine it, which might make it easier to kill it when it's not working, or to integrate it back in, to partner with alliances. It's not always about total re-education of the fundamental business.
Yeah, so you'd have to, the first premise of this is that humanity will change in time, and as a result of that in business, there'll be winners and losers. And then it's a question of, if you need to innovate in order to win, how are you going to do that? And if you're the only one that can do that, because there is no one to work with to do that, if you have to be the company to do that or die, then your investor needs to be prepared to invest in that. Then we get down to leadership. What messages are you giving the market? How are you getting the market behind you? Communication, managerial courage. And I think that's what we need to see more of around the globe.
Do we start with the same question, which is that question of risk? Like Alice, that resonated quite strongly in yours, the risk appetite. The risk appetite of the investor.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's some really interesting things that I was thinking about when you were talking, Simone. So, I think it goes back to that question of what innovation actually is, and to me, it's actually doing something differently. I really liked what you called out in terms of partnering. Even that, to me, is an innovation in an operating model. And so I really like the idea that if you're open to different things, then, good things happen. And you think about exactly what it is that you want to do. What you're good at, I think, is fundamentally important. The interesting thing about a lot of organisations is that they're thinking, is what I'm good at good enough? And that's, I think, a very confronting question. how do I stay relevant? And how am I best placed to succeed in this new competitive landscape? And that's what's driving a lot of it. Also, the demand from consumers, whatever market you're in, whether it's health or, energy, which we mentioned earlier.
Or haircuts.
Or haircuts, actually, I was going to say. And so part of that is actually understanding how you get at the front and anticipate the needs that are coming, because that's where you need to be, and that's a challenge.
Maybe it's just me, but when you said that, I got chills, because is what I'm doing good enough?
Yeah, completely.
Is the sort of starting question.
Yeah.
That objective view of my business.
I want to throw a contrary or a different view, a parallel view, I'll say, which is that sometimes innovation happens when you're not expecting it. So there's two ways, right? So one of them is I'm going to go and do something different, and you've got a strategy and you're deliberate about it and you're trialling and failing and R&D and those types of things, where you actually need to do something in a very structured way. I was reading an article recently about the world's top restaurants and how they innovate. And that's how they've stayed at the front in terms of, the 2 or 3 Michelin stars. And they were talking about El Bulli, and they were saying that the way that they actually started, they've essentially got an R&D lab, and the way that they actually got to that was by taking the opportunity to close down in winter when they were a little bit slower, and go and experiment and find new recipes and then test them through essentially what is an equivalent of an R&D lab. Now, they didn't go out and say, we want to be innovative. Yeah. What they did was, the situation that they were confronting was we're quiet in winter. How do we kind of keep fresh? I don't think they use the word innovative. It just happened organically. And so that's the other interesting thing about, what we're talking about, which is sometimes you say, I need to be more innovative. And in fact, what I've observed in organisations, I'm sure we all have similar examples, is the more innovative you try and be, the more you actually revert to type. Yeah. And so you're actually going backwards.
Or you try and go weird and wacky, and that never really works.
You become the version, you become the thing you think innovation is.
That's right.
Yeah,
Amanda.
Well, exactly. It's the use of the word innovation from, say, from a street level from where I'm from. I automatically think it must be having quite, not otherworldly, but let's look at it from a different angle. Let's think outside the box. But literally it could be, let's just not waste our time in winter when we have more staff than we need and we're wasting produce, and we'll just use that time effectively and then become very popular again when we open up in the warmer months for a restaurant's point of view.
Yeah, isn't it funny that when humans have to come together for a purpose, whether they're in an emergency situation or a wartime situation or closed down over winter, whatever, that's when humans start to innovate. So that's when they sort of say, what could we learn? Now that's all we're really required to do, is just to not be so busy that we don't stop and think, is what we're doing good enough? Could we do it better? How could we learn? Let's move forward.
It goes to that question that you asked about risk, though, because there is something in that type of situation where you're actually feeling like you have nothing to lose. So in an emergency situation, the priority to respond quickly is more important than anything else. And then you've got things like common objectives and so forth. And you might have a humanitarian layer in that. When you're thinking, I'm just going to think about how I make a better use of my time, then you're the trade-off around the risk reward or risk consequence, actually, when you think about risk in this context, it's risk consequence, then you think, well, I can make that trade-off, and the consequence of doing that is not going to be, punitive.
Well, this is the scary thing about larger organisations that are not close to the market. So if you're in a business that's over 500 people and there's a lot of overhead in there, a lot of people who are distant from the market, who are doing the things that they're meant to do in their job description, they get that done at the end of the day and they think, I've done my job and I might take some time off. And I'm not suggesting people need to work all hours, but what if you thought of your job as learning? What if you it never really was an end to your day? You just did what you were interested in. Wouldn't we all naturally innovate that way? Just an interesting concept. When you're closer, you learn more.
And I suppose if things are going well, if you're kind of getting by and there's nothing necessarily bad happening with your business or your company or any sort of workplace, the complacency creeps in, and that can take a very long time. But that very long time, you can suddenly one day become like irrelevant in many ways. Some businesses would.
Yeah.
If they've just been complacent because business as usual has been acceptable. But I imagine that complacency is what is the killer of innovation, because you're not looking to excel or be better. And I know as an improviser, and we talk about it a lot, our kind of innovation is just trying new things on stage. There's no technology involved, or maybe it is people trying different things out, podcasting on, improv shows and things like that. But it's that complacency where you think, well, I'm getting enough work that makes me happy enough. Anything else would feel like I have to work harder. And then so you just kind of plateauing out. And then eventually, though, other people who are hungrier or willing to try something, they're quite happy to take some risks. That one risk they take can, leaps and bounds.
Absolutely, while your material's getting old.
That's right, right. Yeah. Knock, knock. No, this is a good one. No,
the material's not old, by the way.
No.
I'm
it's
a
like
huge
the
fan.
mixtape. We're all fans.
Yeah, take that, Rick Brown.
I reckon there's some myth busting that we could actually do in this podcast. So the word innovation probably, in my experience, is never that helpful. So that would be...
I think people are intimidated by the word
I think that's
innovation.
Right. That's right. And then if we take it one step further, when we say the word creative, then it even gets more scarier in terms of the barrier, those internal barriers that go up for people. The other myth busting would be that I often hear organisations investing in innovation workshops with colour and movement and lights and toys.
Sweatshirts.
And I sometimes wonder whether, because my own reflections is my best ideas come in the quietest moments. So, whether that's in the shower or, going for a walk or something like that, it's the quiet moments.
I've got to stop singing in the shower because it's not quiet when I'm in there. Different shower, don't worry.
And the other myth-busting topic that I learnt absolutely from improvisers, people like you, Amanda, is that innovation comes from the obvious.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I'm really struck because this is where diversity kicks in seriously and big time. If we have 4 different people tackling the one topic, none of us have to be innovative. We all have to say what is our obvious, but my obvious is going to be different to yours, Alice. Right. And yours is going to be different to Simone's going to be different to mine. If we listen, and that's the big if we listen, we will find some innovative answer to the dilemma that we're faced by.
We have a saying which is your obvious could be somebody else's genius. So people are sometimes scared to say the obvious in a... I love that. I just made you react physically.
I've got chills.
Because sometimes...
What is it again?
Your obvious could be somebody else's genius. And in an improv world, it could be something like, just giving someone a cup, a mimed cup. And your obvious thing would be to take a sip. But I promise you, if you take a sip from that mimed cup, the audience goes, oh, she sipped from the cup. And they love it. But if you wear it as a hat, they're like, what is she doing? So really it's about just, if that is the obvious choice and it hasn't been taken yet, you got to do it. So I imagine that works in other worlds as well, where people just say, hey, have we ever thought of it doing this? Or my last workplace, I used to do this. And it's really funny. I've just had lots of admin jobs in my time, going into offices, very low level, just, because I'm a professional actor and singer and improviser. But it
you got a website you'd like to refer us to, Amanda?
Amanda Buckley at facebook.com. Hilarious. But often I've gone in, and because I've temped at a lot of places and I've worked at different workplaces, if I go in and say, do you guys have have you guys ever thought of scanning all these documents instead of putting them in a folder? And people have often said at this one particular workplace, but this is what we've always done. But why? Do we ever look at those pieces of paper? Oh, we need to keep them just in case. Do we really want to keep them here? Oh, can we do that? Really simple things. But often workplaces just go by, but that's what we've always done. It's never been a problem, so we've never addressed it. But little things can make a huge change. And that is Amanda out.
But I'm pumped because I know Simone was particularly pumped, like she was almost high fives in those moments. But I think what we're really saying is if the word innovation and creativity puts pressure on you, the word obvious, I can't imagine that's going to put that much pressure on. So the the visual cup that you're about to hand me, or the improvised cup,
The shared goblet
the
of
shared
trust.
goblet of trust. Oh, fantastic. I need to take a sip out of it.
Drink it. Yes.
That's the gold, as opposed to, as you said, you put it on your head or whatever. So what I'm really trying to say there is it's in the obvious that the genius is, as you've alluded to. I don't know what I'm saying now.
No, it's perfect. It's all good.
I don't know, I'm too excited.
Yeah,
it's really good.
But then here you are
good.
receiving the obvious, someone else's obvious as well. That sort of preparedness to receive, others.
Guys, we're a really good team.
We've cracked the code.
This is so easy. I don't know why everyone isn't doing it.
I know, exactly.
So why aren't people doing it?
That's a really odd.
But I think
Simone.
Alice mentioned something right up the top, which
Right.
really struck with me, which was you said operating in an environment without fear.
Yeah.
Something like along those lines.
Yeah, look, I mean, I mentioned it under culture, I think, or if I didn't, I should have, because that seems like a better
No, I think you
response
did.
now.
I think you did.
I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure
you
I
did.
did.
It was awesome.
Absolutely. And so the culture is, how people operate, how they feel about things, and, that sort of the conventions around how you work and what's acceptable and what's not. And it's interesting because in the example that you just talked about, Amanda, which is, the paper, and that's the way we've always done things, there's not anything that's particularly wrong with that. And that's okay because it works.
Totally.
And so the question is that good enough? And there is something to me about innovation and a culture of challenging how things are done to improve. So you wouldn't do it. And this is the whole thing around, you've got to think about the outcome that you want. You don't just turn up one day and go, I'm not going to drink from a cup at all. I'm just going to, I don't know, put my mouth under the tap and drink from that. That would be like, why are you doing that? That doesn't make sense. And then your analogy wouldn't work either about the cup. So that would be terrible in all sorts
The
of
cup
ways.
is so important.
But there's something though about really saying that that there is something around turning up and saying I want to make things better today. I want today to be better than yesterday. And I heard this expression around productive disruption, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I feel like, hashtag productive disruption, because the whole concept of it is challenge the status quo, and there may be innovation at the end of it. There may not be, and that's okay. It's more about saying challenge that and make sure it makes sense. If it does make sense, if that is okay, if the paper and the folder is okay because for some reason that works, then that's okay. Because what you don't want to do is just usurp everything for the because you get the cynicism, right? We're just changing, and earlier to your point.
So the simplicity in what you're saying is it's not again about innovation. It's about how can I be better? How can the organisation be better? That normal. When I say normal, most people turn up to work wanting to do a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's continuing to tap into that. And perhaps, and maybe I think it is important we talk about the fear aspect of this, the sense of what happens when it goes wrong, when it fails, when
like
it
if there are
stuffs up.
consequences to those thoughts of change. Or
Yeah, which clearly keeps people quite stuck.
Yeah.
And sometimes for very valid reasons, like it doesn't feel safe. It just doesn't feel safe to throw up, even if it's an obvious idea. Like I feel that I'm going to get attacked.
Blamed, usually.
Blamed.
I mean, and that's where the whole idea of, putting yourself out there. Some of it's vulnerability, but some of it is just much more fundamental, which is I don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardise my job. And that might be because, you need the job, or because it creates a structure of certainty. There's so many dimensions to all of that. And so there's something to me about, and that's the productive disruption link. I think the idea of turning up every day and working as if it's your last. What would you do? And what would you do?
I'd probably flip the desk though, so I'm not sure if I knew it was my last
I'd turn
day.
up. you know what I mean. Let's just go with it because it's a terrible analogy now that we've said it out loud.
No.
But if tomorrow was your last day of work, what would you do? What would you say? Respectfully, this isn't about going in and downloading on
you
everyone.
like the job.
But how would you act? What would you challenge? What would you call out that doesn't make sense? And how would you challenge people? And so, if you could have that environment, that would be an awesome environment. And obviously organisations with those environments do exist.
Yeah, I think this is why, one of the primary roles of a leadership team is to create that safety and security, that environment of safety and security. It's not just HR's job. It's it's all of that executive team to give their people permission to do that. Or if you're in a smaller business, it's your job as the boss to get that done. Because to take that sort of fear away from having an opinion and failing is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also to be very clear to what kind of scope people have to fail. So if 90% of your revenue comes from a core business that runs, say you're working for a law firm, those that runs on accuracy, or you're an airline pilot. You're working
Then don't take too many risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Right. So let's all just be clear, but here are the parameters in which we're thinking about repositioning our organisation, and and we want you at the airline pilot to contribute to that problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah, there's something about it reminds me of Jim Collins' book Good to Great, and he talks about one of the principles of these organisations that have continued to grow around sitting down at the executive table and talking about what's worked and what hasn't. And to me, the whole idea of risk and fear is actually being able to talk about things that didn't work. So being really deliberate about what you're going to do. So you can innovate in the aviation industry. I just wouldn't do it as a pilot in the middle of a flight, right? And so that is obvious. So if you do choose to think about something, it doesn't work, then go back and examine that forensically, without emotion and without the blame, and learn from it, as well as think about what you did that worked well so you can replicate that. And that, to me, is, part of the magic ingredient around how you actually kind of build this different culture, which needs to be foundational, because then you can open yourself up, as you said earlier, Simone, to different partnerships. Because you have the confidence of what you're good at and what your partner is good at. Otherwise, then you don't go in with trust and so forth. So there's a lot of really different things that you can do, just within the right constraints.
It sounds like if leaders are modelling that behaviour, showing that amount of willingness to ask questions and, like you said, challenge some things that maybe haven't been challenged for a really long time, but then showing that modelling that behaviour just says it's okay, to the parameters of making sure it's still productive to the core of the business as opposed to just because.
Yes, yeah, and making sure, I think, in if you're the person learning and trying to do the innovative thing, to be really conscious of how much your ego is playing into that.
That's great point.
To recognise, I think the first thing is to point out within yourself where you could be flawed in your logic set or in your ability to execute. To acknowledge that I don't know how these dots are going to connect, and I may not be great at making decisions around the commercial analysis of my idea or whatever it might be that's not your strength. So really, really important that if you are going to use other people's money or your own money, if this is your own idea, that you're very conscious of communicating what you know and what you don't know, and communicate that as you move forward. Just to be very respectful that as much as you love your idea and you're curious about how this thing's going to unfold, there are other people, at risk here. It's not a business, it's other people's money. And it could be your family's money.
Wow. Ego, I reckon we might not open that up right now, although...
That's a can of worms. I mean, I have no ego, so it's fine, because I'm very
apparently
humble.
It's a dirty word.
And beautiful.
Yes. Ego on stage as well. That's the other thing we could talk a lot about.
Completely. There's so
performers.
There's so many transferables there into my world, particularly around trust and fear. Operating within the constraints of I'm allowed to try things, I'm allowed to show a certain amount of vulnerability, and I can make mistakes. I just have to get back up quickly, and that's a lot of the improviser talk we have about failing in moments. Like we will fail a moment, but we won't. New improvisers they're new for a reason, and so they're allowed to. There's a bigger allowance to how much failing we fail gracefully or we fail fabulously. But as you become more experienced, you still fail, but you'll fail a moment, not the whole show. You won't. That you pick yourself up from that, and your co-workers, your colleagues, your co-performers. are all aware that they've got you back at all times. So if those moments happen, they're there to pick you up, and you're there to pick them up when it happens to them, because that's the agreement, that's the trust environment that we work within.
Yes.
So a lot of it is so transferable, because ultimately we're all. It keeps coming back. I've heard. I've been binge listening to Leadership of Fools, not just to listen to my own voice, but to remind myself of the amazing things that we talk about. But there's so much conversation about being human ultimately, and just a reminder that we are all humans. So we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be vulnerable. We have to be honest. We won't know everything, but to not let that hold us back from doing amazing things, because collectively we can achieve much more.
Absolutely.
There's something about how you learn a skill and how you master something, and that's through iteration. And you don't, I don't know about you guys, but, I tried to play the piano in year 10. It turned out my hands were too small to span.
See, when nature works against you.
I know, so that was nature. But no one, I guess, except for, geniuses perhaps, but even I'm sure Mozart practiced a lot. He didn't sort of start playing the piano at 6 months.
I'm fairly certain he was insane
I'm probably
as well.
going to, okay. Just go with me on this. It's turning out to be a very bad analogy. But the idea is that you need to start, you need to think about something. You need to have an idea, a goal or a passion, whatever that might be, and then you need to dedicate time to it and commitment, and you're not going to get it right the first time. I don't know how many things that any of us could pick up and do for the first time and get it right 100% of the time. And so there's failure, but failure doesn't need to necessarily mean I've crashed and burned. It's actually, hey, I didn't get it quite right, and maybe it's just I need to tweak, and that's the whole idea of everyone's using agile strategies now, so that's part of that. But the whole idea of resilience as well, which is I'm not going to get to play the piano the first time, or I'm not going to run, do 1,000 things well. I'm going to keep improving, and that's okay as well, because I can see the end state. And so there is something around diligence, commitment, resilience, and then adaptation along the way, which goes to your point, Simone, about you're not there to blow a whole ton of cash and go, well, I'm innovating, get with the program. It's really about saying I've got this, it hasn't worked, and within those constraints, this is what I learned. Or if I make this tweak, it's going to get me to where I need to be.
Yes.
And so that's part of the cultural piece as well.
One of the things that I've learned along the way about culture in sort of private equity companies, or business like realestate.com.au that are rapid growth, or non-digital companies, is the culture of innovation and learning is cheap. You don't have to spend a lot of money on that.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's great.
And what's really fun about it, why I know I'm addicted to it, and I know that Alice is as well, is that you get to infuse things. So it might look silly to throw a beanbag in the corner, or bring in some band equipment and those sorts of things, but what you're doing is you're encouraging people just to learn, and to learn about the thing you got to do, or just this idea of be uncomfortable with not knowing the future, and have a go. And so I've just recently applied that to my personal life. I just want to share, and not just to see, does this really work? I picked up the ukulele recently.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I thought I've got to start getting uncomfortable again, because I'm sort of trying to teach people about new
Leadership
things.
of Fools band.
We need that.
Oh, God, you said that one day I might be able to sing on the podcast, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later, Colin.
Clearly, I've told you I did not succeed with the piano, right? So that was where you fail fast.
We start
and move
again.
on.
Well, just to kind of talk about ego and how that gets in the way of learning. It's really do things before you think even about your business. There's going to be new things you're going to do in business. I'd encourage you to do things. Look at maybe what your child's doing at school, or put some other subjects, not just your business subject. Go and learn to surf. Go and learn to snowboard. Go and learn to play the ukulele. Do things that you may not want to master, but teach you how to learn again.
Yeah, it's
because we
wonderful.
fail to
Love
do
it.
that as adults.
Yeah,
I feel like
love it.
I feel like that is almost like we've already found our takeaways.
Yeah.
But would anyone? Would we like to go around and just very briefly?
The only other one that thematically played out over that conversation was, I think the question we asked was teaching organisations, and I'm now reframing that to, I think we have to fundamentally look at the how, the culture, the environment. The learning will kick in rather than the teaching idea. An environment of learning rather than an environment of teaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's something to that anyway.
Exactly. A takeaway from you?
Yeah, I think that's the main one. I think this is where some of the greatest companies of our time have hit on this with their campus, university approach, academic approach to business.
Yeah.
They're very clear about when's for business and when's for play, but play and learnings goes hand in hand, and we've all got to play as adults in order to get those insights.
And Alice?
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and instead of saying no when I can't, and that's the way it's always been done, say what if I can, and reimagine the way it could be, and if it doesn't work, that's okay. At least you tried.
Fantastic. Guys, I think that we don't just have a leadership of fools, we have a friendship of legends. And, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's all hear it for everybody's obvious being complete genius.
After re-listening, we've retitled the episode You're Obvious, Others Genius. A few mentoring hits today. Number one, teams can be great at innovating when they are diverse. But it's also important that when people offer their obvious, the team listens and receives that obvious. Number two, teaching innovation is not nearly as important as creating an environment of learning. And our final mentoring hit for the day, innovation is easy when we focus on customer needs. And a slight take on this, or a different take on this, it is easier if we treat it every day as our last one in our roles.
Thanks for listening. Leadership of Fools is a Somersault production. Somersault works with organisations through transformation and growth. Please subscribe to our podcast via iTunes or wherever you do your listening. And don't forget to visit leadershipoffools.com.